Good morning. This is Chief Warrant Officer 4 Vic Pinion, U.S. Navy retired, telling some stories from my naval career. This story is when I was the bow catapult chief aboard the USS Ranger CV-61. And in this story I want to tell about the two first-class petty officers that were in the bow cat's crew. Cat 1's cat captain, ABE-1 Maurice Bedell, and Cat 2's cat captain, ABE-1 George Chandler. Both of them were very good men. They were good petty officers, but they exhibited different character traits like just about everyone does. Where George Chandler was always calm and in charge, and he could handle his crew being excited and confused and whatnot, and he could get control of situations and calm people down and get them to perform. Where Bedell had never worked steam catapults before in his life. He had worked hydraulic catapults, but he had never been to school for steam catapults. He knew not much about them. But he was a first-class petty officer, and he had been assigned to be the catapult captain of catapult number 1, Cat 1. Well, another problem there was only about 3 or 4 men of the 17-men Bobcat's crew that had been aboard the ship when it went into that shipyard, the San Francisco Naval Shipyard, for this 1-year-long comprehensive overhaul. Well, Bedell was one of those. He reported aboard in the middle of the overhaul. But the problem was he didn't have anyone in his crew. He had one man in his crew who had some previous experience. The rest of them were either straight out of boot camp or come from somewhere else where they had no catapult experience. But I had put together a training program to teach these young men about the catapults that had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. But with the exception that neither Bedell nor Chandler had ever seen a chief get this involved before. To them, the chief was somebody that stayed in the chief's mess and didn't come around much. Well, I came around. I spent my time on the job. I didn't goof off in the chief's mess. And I noticed that the crew didn't know the catapults. So I put together a training program to teach them. Well, neither George nor Bedell liked attending lectures, and they viewed this training as lectures when it wasn't. It was programmed and broke down by description of the machinery, how it worked, what you did to operate it, how you went about operating it, and those 3 different phases of the training. And being as how we were in the shipyard, the machinery was all torn apart and so forth, it was an excellent time to teach that. Well, those young men ate that up. They loved it. And they would study in there all the time, and they would challenge each other who knew the most about the catapult. Anyway, I've already told that story, but George and Bedell did not like attending those training sessions, and I didn't require them to. I encouraged them to, but I didn't require them to. But I did notice that one or both of them might be standing kind of in the background a little bit. They would be paying attention. Well, especially Bedell. But George Chandler had been working steam catapults since they had first came out back in the early 1950s decade. And he'd been working them his whole career. He had learned them through experience. He had never been to school for them, but he had learned them through experience, and he could make them work. But the character traits of these two people, these two petty officers, Bedell was a spit and polish man. Everything was clean, sparkling, shiny. His machinery, his spaces, and his people. They're all squared away. Militarily, although he didn't know much about the catapults to teach them about them. Well, he had become aware that they had already learned more than he knew about them by attending these training sessions. So he would kind of hang around without admitting he was attending them and paying attention. I did notice that. But George Chandler, totally different character. Like I said, he had learned the catapults through experience. He knew them quite well and could make them work. A lot of things that he had learned through experience was not correct, such as the procedures for making adjustments and so forth. And he could make them work, but his little unorthodox procedures in setting up things and testing them and so forth, but he could make them work. But the thing about him was, when we got out of the yards and we started operating, anytime George needed to replace a part that broke on his catapult, Bedell figured that if he did what Chandler did, he couldn't go wrong. So when George replaced a part on his catapult, Bedell wanted to replace the same part on his cat, even though there's nothing wrong with it. And so I found him doing that several times, and I stopped him from doing it. And of course that annoyed him. I mean, he did not like it. Somebody telling him he couldn't do something. Well, there was no reason to do it other than George did it on his cat. Well, the part may have broken on George's cat or worn out. Bedell felt cheated if he didn't get to replace the same part on his cat. So I started carefully controlling Bedell with the parts he replaced on his cat, because, why replace a part was not necessary. Well, we went for about a year like that. George wanted to replace a part on his bridle arrestor. His bridle arrestor had been sticking up on the bow. And we thought it was because of misaligned cat tracks, bridle arrestor tracks, so forth. And we'd even had a couple of different capsule reps, the civilian tech reps, get involved, and they had even straightened out a dip in the forward end of the cat, forward of the cat track that they thought might be contributing to it. But these capsule reps had not figured out why the thing was sticking. But George Chandler on his cat, his didn't stick like that. But George's pilot valve, for the retract pilot valve, went bad, and he replaced it with a new one, and his cat worked fine. So Bedell figured that his pilot valve wasn't working right, and that's why his was sticking up on the bow. And it cost us a lot of work going up, beating on it with sledgehammers and stuff. And so he wanted to order a new valve for his. I said, Bedell, there ain't nothing wrong with yours. No, he said both. He said, no, I wasn't both. I was a chief. Chief, it is that pilot valve's not working right, and I need to replace it. And I said, well, you're going to have to show me. So he did show me. He was right. We replaced that pilot valve, and his problem was over. And I was embarrassed by that, because we'd been experiencing that problem for about a year. But it took George's malfunctioning and him replacing his for Bedell to, of course, he always wanted to replace whatever George replaced. But Bedell looked at his carefully, because I'd been requiring him to show me before I'd let him replace the part. Well, he was right, and I had been wrong. And all these tech reps and everybody else, and George Chandler too, trying to troubleshoot Bedell's cat. But Bedell did figure it out, and he was right. Well, I acknowledged that he was right and I was wrong, and told him that, Bedell, you did good. Well, so no matter who you are, you can learn things from people that are junior to you and that are under your charge. You should pay attention to them. But I did learn this from Bedell. Of course, it angered him that I had not wanted him to replace that valve. and made him prove to me that it needed to be replaced. Well, that's all good. Well, I learned something there too. But boy, did Bedell, he loved that he had been right and the chief was wrong. But I did acknowledge it. That's an important thing. They went on, and George Chandler did make chief. But Bedell, I don't think he ever did. I think he retired as a first class. But we transferred off the Ranger and went on our ways. But I always remembered this situation where I had been restricting Bedell's replacing of parts that didn't need to be replaced until I kind of assumed that he automatically wanted to replace anything George replaced on his, which he still did want to do. But this time, although all those other times he'd been wrong, this time he was right. But you know what? He benefited from that too. It boosted his morale and made him a better man, even though he was already pretty doggone good. But it made him a better catapult man and a better petty house. Okay, that's the end of the story.